Let's do it. Let's talk to our wonderful guest today. Adolph Reed joins us to discuss lots of issues, including this upcoming election. Thank you for joining us.
There it is.
Sorry. Sorry, Anna.
Oh, no worries. So I was listening to your interview on Useful Idiots, and I really liked it, especially because you talked a little bit about, some of the ways that, working Americans are covered in the corporate media, and how, the disdain toward working Americans is pretty obvious, and how they share that disdain about working Americans with no problem, and then immediately jump to kind of these divide and conquer tactics that avoid, the material conditions of the majority of Americans, while focusing on some of the identity stuff that they think will help Democrats win and beat Donald Trump. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think so. To be honest, I can't quite recall the Useful Idiots thing, but well, really, I've known for a long time, because I've been around and seen it for a long time, that going back at least to the Nixon administration, when Nixon tried to depict the working class through a cultural stereotype, right? Conservative white guys, not much education, et cetera, et cetera. But then with Reagan, this mythology of what the working class is, or of who the working class is, got kicked into high gear, and Democrats, or the emerging, neoliberal Democrats, took on the same notion, right? The same idea of what the working class is, and the symbolic image was Joe Sixpack, right? And the Joe Sixpack was a stereotype of a willfully ignorant, bigoted, sexist, racist guy. Pardon me a second. I'm going to stop this thing.
No worries.
Yeah, I thought I set it off.
A house phone. Haven't heard one of those in a while.
Yeah, no, I know. It's got a life of its own, too. No, but anyway. All right, it should be done now. Yes, okay. Pardon me. But so the working class, through a cultural of the reversal, right, got depicted as a bastion of every kind of conservatism you can possibly imagine, because the only kind of conservatism anybody wanted to talk about anyway was social conservatism, because economic conservatism by Reagan's first term was pretty much hegemonic already. I mean, I've always said that, or I've said this since 1980 anyway, that Jimmy Carter was basically the warm-up act for Reagan. And we've been, and from that perspective, a financial sector-driven understanding of economic policy has been dominant, at least since the Carter administration. And if you sort of tease it back a little bit, you can see, you can trace the zygote back to the Kennedy administration, because that's when the center, or the central focus of economic policy, shifted entirely to currency, or to maintaining currency stability, and paying no attention whatsoever to full employment, except in the way that the Kennedy Keynesian economists were able, or redefined full employment to match whatever the level of unemployment that there was at the moment, which was clever. But I've known for a long time the role that the social sciences played in the U.S. After World War II in sort of squeezing class out of public discourse and out of social imagination, and especially any notion of class was rooted in a political economy. But it's really only in the course of working on this book, I've been working on it for too long now, that I've come to see just how central social science and what would now be called public intellectual opinion shaping was in transforming class from a category rooted in political economy to a category that's rooted in culture. And then you get to define the working class tautologically, right, by being white, male, ethnic, Catholic, backward, et cetera, et cetera. So, like, this is everybody's trope now, right? And it's probably the trope of far too many of our colleagues on the left, right? Like, in one way or another. So, in that sense, so one of the challenges facing us now, and this is one of Bernie Sanders' principal or great accomplishments, was to put the idea of class politics rooted in political economy and in concerns of economic inequality back into public discussion and public discourse. And of course, Bernie couldn't have done it if the objective conditions hadn't made it possible to do it, right? Or, I mean, necessary to do it. I mean, if we think back to the Great Recession, I recall, I think it was CPR, maybe, who did a report a year and a half down the road, had found that within a year, the top 20% of income earners had pretty much gotten back everything they'd lost, right? And everybody else has recovered since. Things have gotten worse and worse and worse and worse. And I just put this on the table, which goes beyond like the purview of the question, I guess. But
not at all.
That, when we look, like, I mean, not just in the U.S., right, but in the fate of the so-called pink tide governments in Latin America, what's happened in Greece, India, Hungary, Poland, I toss in Boris Johnson in the UK and elsewhere. One possibility for us to consider seriously is that it may well be that neoliberalism is coming close to exhausting its capacities to deliver enough stuff to enough people in any one of these societies to be able to sustain its legitimacy as a nominally democratic order now, right? And if so, what that means, what that could well mean is that there are only two ways forward. One is in the direction of authoritarian neoliberalism, right? Because frankly, democratic institutions has never really been the fun part of neoliberalism for the ruling class anyway. And the other direction is stepping off toward some kind of social democratic like vision or a commitment to government in the public good, right? And for the public good. And I think the challenge for the left, and yes, I mean, now Biden is whatever Biden is. I mean, the slogan I came up with right at one point is Biden Harris 2020, because sometimes you just have to clean the damn bathroom. But that's all that's to be expected from that, right? You have a clean bathroom. The ideal outcome from this election is that we'll have to fight against them for 4 years, right? Get ready for something else. And frankly, the great danger of the Biden-Harris administration, as I see it, is that they won't address anything. They'll paper over the contradictions, like in the same way that the Obama administration did. And 4 years or 8 years down the road, we'll find ourselves up against a more competent and serious Trump.
Yeah.
But then that leads to like a discussion of what the left's mission is and how we need to think about what that mission is, and maybe we can talk about that too.
No, absolutely.
Not too long.
No, not at all. I want to talk about, because I think this is an important thing for the left to understand. I want to ask you about the racial wealth gap, which is a very cited statistic. It's constantly cited. I mean, that white families make something like 13 times more than black families on average. I mean, I saw Matt Bruning at the People's Policy Project put out a post which he he talked about it. If you remove the top 10% of earners from the white cohort and you remove the top 10% of earners from the black cohort, the bottom 90% of both more or less make the same. There's still a little bit, but it's more or less the same. That the racial wealth gap is really driven by the top 10% of earners. And it strikes me as like maybe one of the key statistics that reinforces what you're talking about of how identities paper over class differences.
Oh yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. And I mean, it's also worth noting Robert Manduca found that the key to explaining the racial wealth gap is the racial income gap. Right. So I mean that has other implications, right? And in fact, the reason that the income gap hasn't changed much over the last half century is that I mean, although blacks' income has increased across the board right over that period, it's the intensifying pattern of income inequality overall, right? That has kept that has kept the overall racial the overall racial income gap pretty much stagnant, right? So that the concentration of wealth and income at the top, right, at the very top, and there are a handful of black people close to the very top, and a lot more than there were. And this is maybe the more important fact: probably 4 times more or more, rich black people basically than there were in 1968. But the thing is, I mean, this is the thing for me, right? I've been trying to figure out because even the most cursory and casual observation as you walk around the streets shows that Black America or class and income differentiation among Black Americans have increased significantly over the last 50 years, right? So what's the point in apart from a certain kind of emotional satisfaction, what's the point in insisting that that's not true, right? In insisting that that Black American status in the society is what it was under Jim Crow, or what it was under slavery, right? And I think I'm starting to get a sense of an explanation, and that I have to think the corporate rush to show how woke they are right after the George Floyd and Breonna Taylor murders, and the $2 billion that such great friends of human equality and justice as Jeff Bezos and Walmart, right, have pumped into Black Lives Matter organizations or into 501c3s and NGOs and the like. And it's that what we understand to be, well, what my son and I and others have been calling openly, like a race reductionist political agenda and understanding of the needs of Black Americans, which, among other things, supports the contention that programs aimed at reducing economic inequality across the board don't do anything for Black people. The silent statement there is that they don't do anything for rich Black people or for upwardly mobile Black people, or don't do that much for the professional and managerial strata, right? And so what we've come to now is it is a kind of funny combination of a Black or a nominal Black political agenda. And by the way, like, nobody ever asks who sets the Black political agenda, right? Or where it comes from, who devises it or whatever. But a Black political agenda that is skewed, the more it looks like concrete policies or practices, the more clearly it's skewed toward the interests of the entrepreneurial and investment classes and people who vie to be professional representatives of the racial voice, or as I call them, professional racial voices. And then what's offered, what's on offer as an alternative to support for a social democratic program of redistribution, which by the way was what was the consensual center of gravity of Black American politics from like the mid 30s through the 60s. But now activists even reject that and claim that it doesn't do anything to Black people because they've committed by and large to racializing the working class, right, as a white phenomenon, right? So every time Bernie Sanders made some appeal to the working class, or anybody else does, they get blasted for being racist because somehow working class doesn't include Black people. But what Black people get, right, or the apparent populist bone for the black masses is the criminal justice stuff, right, which also rests on a myth, right, like a mythical notion that any Black person is as likely as any other Black person to be shot down by cops or be treated harshly or brutalized or whatever. So that's like an abstract. I mean, I'm not clear if I'm being clear here, but the mass agenda is this abstract notion that we all suffer the same from brutality and mass incarceration. And I'll digress off my digression for a second. I did a Justice Democrats panel a few months ago, and one of the candidates on it, one was a really impressive woman, like from St. Louis, who actually won. I'm blocking her name now. She was also a standard surrogate. But one was this guy from Brooklyn who took issue with my suggestion that class differentiation has occurred among Black Americans, and his argument that he can't recognize any such thing as class differences among Black people because when he goes to his front door, he's just as likely to be shot by the cops as any other Black person. So I thought, okay, so this is the ideological work that line is doing, and it works to sort of perfume. It works as a kind of populist perfume on the big foundation money, corporate money, backdoor Dem Wall Street money that the movement's actually driving, or is being driven by, or is driving toward. But let me say one more thing about that, right? I mean, just that, because I've been thinking a lot about this too, and it came up again a day or two ago. We all are inclined to assume, for a variety of reasons, that street action or the militant proclamations from Black or brown people who present themselves as activists or as moral voices are intrinsically left, right? And that they're intrinsically compatible with, if not consistent with, a larger left program. And one of the reasons that it makes, or it's understandable that people make that presumption, is that from the mid 30s through the mid 60s or the 70s even, the two norms that operated in Black politics that political scientist Preston Smith calls the ideal of the racial democracy and the ideal of social democracy. They coexisted, converged, were in conflict in discrete instances. It was also the case that segment of the society, apart from Black Americans, that was most dependably supportive of Black political agenda or an agenda of racial justice, were people on the left. So they coexisted. But just because they coexisted doesn't mean that they're intrinsically the same or even compatible, right? The ideal, right, of the norm of racial democracy is a society that operates off the basis of strict equality of opportunity, right, or radical equality of opportunity. Where the goal is to remove all the fetters, all of the arbitrary or bigoted fetters on blacks or other non-whites being able to pursue equality of opportunity on the same basis as everybody else in the society. That doesn't necessarily require a commitment to social a social democratic program or like even any commitment to a notion of any sort of notion of racial equality, of economic equality across the board. And I think we got a problem now that so many people are accustomed to presuming that what comes out of the precincts of militant black voice is not necessarily compatible with a left program, but it's not, right? Like it doesn't have to be. I mean, I've sometimes had people say to me, "Well, why are you so harsh on people who are fundamentally our allies?" And my response is always, I wouldn't be harsh if I thought they were our allies, but my point is that
they're not. Yeah. No, yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, so question about that, because, when you take a step back and you look at how certain, let's say, congressional races play out, specifically
right.
Congressional races where you have, a socialist candidate, someone further to the left, challenging an incumbent Democrat. Mm-hmm. It's incredible how quickly that race will devolve into accusations of racism, sexism, anti-Semitism, whatever. I mean, pick your poison. Against the challenger, right? The progressive or the leftist who's challenging the incumbent Democrat. Right. And if you're following it, it just comes off as incredibly disingenuous. It comes off as nothing more as a way to smear someone who's coming forward with a different set of economic policies that would certainly improve the lives of everyone across the board, regardless of, gender, sex, all of that stuff, race. But it's amazing how quickly, at least some portion of the left falls for that narrative. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's part of the reason why we've had difficulty in winning, to be quite honest with you. And so do you see a more effective strategy to mitigate that?
Yeah, I see a couple things. First, I'm going to say that I'm offended that you said and all those other things and then just tossed race in there with them. No, I'm joking, but no,
believe me, I know you're joking.
Damn, we're about to make headlines.
You would pull that move, though, right? I mean, ideally, you know better than to ask him. But well, look, I mean, first point is that all politics in a class society is the class politics, right? So the question is not whether or not say Black Lives Matter is a class politics or whatever we think of as race radicalism. It is a class politics. That's foregone because you're in a class society. The question is which class does this politics connect with, and which class's interest does this politics connect with? When I was still teaching at Yale, this was like in the late 80s, and I have some of my Black colleagues would say things to me like, well, Adolph, you have to understand that there's more to life than economics, right? And, healthcare and stuff like that. And I would think, because I was still like too genteel or too nice a guy or too chicken shit or whatever, to say, yeah, well, that's kind of easy for you to say, isn't it? Because you're an Ivy League professor and you know all this stuff, right? And it's still kind of like that, right? I mean, even the more radical sounding demands like abolish or defund the police, polls have shown consistently, and you wouldn't even need the polls if you spent any time hanging out like in working class Black communities, Black people don't want to abolish the police, right? They want the police to come when they need them to come. Well, my son and I have been joking that I mean, nobody with a car and a TV set wants to abolish the police. That's just a fact of life, right? Especially in a highly stratified society with a lot of poor people in it. But the bigger problem,
they just want the police to actually do what they're supposed to do in
right,
protecting and serving them. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. But I think that the problem is that that the moves that you talk about, right, are the red baiting, right, and it's funny how they've like managed simultaneously like to invert race baiting, right, to point it back the other way, and to make it the same thing as red baiting, right, but that's what the deal is, and after we saw, not just the Black political establishment, but the Black corporate media establishment, and even the Black activist establishment, if you want to talk about it, right, about such a thing, like the people who perform the Potemkin politics of speaking for Black masses in very articulate ways, typically on MSNBC. The way that they all immediately, right? I mean, what went after Sanders should say something about the class character of that politics. Now, I know that part of it is that their main interest, right, is for, and I think this is true of the reparations thing too, and I'll explain that in a second as well. Their real political interest is to make certain that all discussions of the interest of Black Americans in political life be understood through the rubric of race. Why? Because this is a stratum that's largely people who are to one degree or another enmeshed in a race relations industry, and they don't work for our side. I mean, just like from the role of racial spokesperson, right? Since Booker T. Washington first crafted it, right, in late 1890s, was never addressed laterally, right, to an audience of working class Black people. It was always addressed to the ruling class, and was always linked to an objective of sort of holding the franchise of defining what Black Americans' interests are. And that's a reason as well that the briefs that explain the roots or foundations of current inequality that appears in the form, or even worse, can be made to appear in the form of racial disparities. Where do we go to get the explanations? We go to Jim Crow. We go to some discriminatory facets of the New Deal. We go to slavery. We go to the dystopian Shangri-La of Afro-pessimism, right? Where like nothing has ever changed, and Black people are suppressed by ontological anti-Blackness. That insistence on maintaining race as the sole frame of reference for talking about any claims that are to be made by or on behalf of Black people to the state or other governing institutions is by definition threatened by politics that says, look, let's look at what all working people share, and let's try to come together around the solidarities that we share, right? That we have common. Build the solidarities on the basis of common problems, and then to whatever extent you need to have like a racial diversity training, you can have it on the basis of that solidarity. But that's not the point, because the point isn't to change the society, right? The point is, and like this is true of all of the disparitarian stuff, that, and then maybe this is something I should have said from the very outset, that what we've got is a difference between a demand that we focus exclusively on inequalities that are produced within capitalism, and not at all on those inequalities that are produced by capitalism. And to me, that's like a marker between left and not left. I mean, I'm old school, certainly in that sense, but that's kind of what it comes down to. And the point I was going to make, or how I was going to drag the reparations thing into this point. I mean, going back to when it came out of the crypt again, right around the turn of the century, I'd spent a month out of the country seeing family elsewhere, and hadn't had news here, and got back, and like all of a sudden it was like this rhetoric that I knew from soapbox orators, right? Like in Harlem or whatever, or on the south side of Chicago, like is all of a sudden a big serious issue, and law professors are involved in it, right, and so forth and so on. And in sort of talking to colleagues and former comrades and stuff who were into that stuff, it became clear to me that the whole point, what's attractive about it, it's kind of something different for the lawyers, because this is just the kind of stuff that they do. But what's attractive about it is that it demands that we talk about inequalities and injustices that affect Black people, specifically in language of race. And some of the older hands who had come out of Black Power and the New Communist Movement or whatever, ultimately admit that, right? So it's not about, and the idea even for the radicals, right? I mean, not the tin horns, but the radicals' idea was that you push reparations in part to show that Black people can never attain liberation, whatever that is, in the United States. So, but okay. I'll be quiet now.
No, not at all. Well, I'm curious. I want to ask about South Carolina, which is a state I know you're very familiar with, right. Because South Carolina was really the place where Bernie Sanders' momentum was really halted in the Democratic primary, and the gleeful reaction from the sort of establishment liberals painted South Carolina Black voters as some sort of like mystical, metaphysical thing. Right. But I do want to ask about the struggles of not just Bernie, but other kind of insurgent candidates have had with Black voters. I just want to read really quickly from Matt Karp's piece about Bernie Sanders' campaign. He said, this is not limited to Bernie. He says, in the 2015 Chicago mayoral election, Rahm Emanuel beat Chuy Garcia with huge margins among Black voters. The same pattern was visible in gubernatorial races in Virginia, New Jersey, Michigan, and New York, where Black voters overwhelmingly backed Ralph Northam, Phil Murphy, Gretchen Whitmore, and Andrew Cuomo against progressive outsiders. In last year's race for Queens District Attorney, Melinda Katz barely edged past Tiffany Caban with strong support of Black voters in Southeast Queens. So there seems to be a sort of durable pattern, especially amongst older Black voters. I mean, we saw earlier that even some young Black voters are actually breaking for Trump. But what is going on there? Why the struggle for left-wing insurgent candidates, whether they be Black against white establishmentarians? Why are they struggling with Black voters?
Well, I mean, like in a way, and regarding South Carolina in particular, like comrade and colleague Willie Leggett and I and Cedric Johnson twice have tried to tackle this issue in print, like in Common Dreams and the Jacobin and the Non-Site. But the first order explanation is pretty simple, right? That most people don't think of electoral politics, and certainly not in the last half century or last 40 years, let's say. Don't think of electoral politics as the domain for expressing their political aspirations, right? And it makes sense that they don't, because it hasn't been, right? It's been if not a clubhouse domain, it's been a domain where candidates haven't offered big ideas or big promises or really tried to mobilize anything, right? So to go back to South Carolina primary 2020, yeah, I mean we were working down there, and between the beginning of December and the primary, we actually got more than 18,000 South Carolinians, mainly black, mainly working class, to sign pledge cards saying that they didn't want to vote for anybody who didn't support Medicare for all. Well, then obviously a bunch of them voted for Clyburn, and the reasons that apparent anomaly, right, appeared is that people are incorporated into, or I mean, those who vote and participate in electoral politics are by and large incorporated into sort of business as usual networks, right? That's who turns out the vote, and I think leftists have operated with a couple of misconceptions about the electoral realm. One is one is that you can build a movement through electoral candidacy, and I've never believed that. Bernie did a Herculean job of trying to use the election campaign to help to stimulate a movement building organizing effort, and that was successful. I think it was very successful. That's why I just got so irritated with all the smart ass lefties trying to come up with a novel explanation about why Bernie lost. Bernie was never going to win, right? I mean, who with serious politics, right? Except for at most maybe 15 minutes, like between or after the Nevada prime or caucuses, thought that Bernie could really win the Democratic nomination and be elected president. He might have had a better chance to be elected president if he won the nomination, but nobody really thought he was going to win the nomination. And people who did, well, I'm sorry, but I got some beachfront property I want to sell you. But the big news, right, was that in at least 20 consecutive primaries, a majority of Democratic voters, including in South Carolina, expressed their preference for Medicare for all. That was something we could put on, right? And that's where the organizing had to happen. And we've been sort of complaining and grousing and feeling held back since the pandemic started, because we've still got a field operation going in South Carolina, but it's all on TV now. And that gets to the other point, right? That the thing of one of the core problems with the left, and I trace this back to the new left, right, even, but the notion that all we need to do is get the right ideas and a properly charismatic person and some earnest volunteers, and we can use the election or use election campaigns to knock the shackles off people's eyes, to overcome four decades of hegemonic Thatcherism, basically, right? And insistent and an environment that insistently sort of beats down your aspirations, right? I mean, if you think about the 2020 primaries, right? Klobuchar and the rest of the cretins on the stage, and Biden, and after a while even Warren, less so Warren, but we're all about telling people that it was irresponsible to want anything, right? And that's what's been coming from the Democrats at least since Clinton, right? Or going back to '85 to the founding of the DLC. That's been the whole point, right? And that doesn't change, right? People become accustomed to thinking about politics in a domain that's separate from stuff you'd like to see happen, right? I mean, it's unfortunate, but I think there's a lot of evidence to support that. So the problem is, though, that to the extent that that's how we proceed and want to have and indulge the fantasy that maybe, I mean, I kick this off, I don't know what, the WTO, whatever, that something can happen, right? Some big intervention can come and reshuffle the deck, right? I mean, reset the playing field, right? Is just wrong. And I know that a lot of it has to do with a sense of urgency, right? Because things are so bad and getting worse. But the reality is we didn't get into this situation overnight. We're not going to get out of it overnight. And we certainly aren't going to get out of it if we continue to try to treat the movement like it's a frat or a sorority where you've got to prove that you're worthy to be let in. And worst of all, that PhD students like in lit studies are going to be the ones making the determination about what the rules are for getting in. Well, we got to start trying to figure out how to talk to people that don't already agree with us, right? And that's where the work has to be. That's where the movement has to come from, right? Like I've always seen elections or seen the electoral realm as the domain for consolidating victories that have been won on the plane of social movement organizing, and that's what we consistently fail to do, right? And I know this is an unpopular view, but like social media stuff is useful for a lot, but you don't build a movement with it. You can mobilize, right? People who are already part of us, but we've got to go out. Like, I'll give you an illustration. I mentioned this a couple of times now. For the Sanders campaign, actually almost exactly a year ago, I did a gig at the Steelworkers Hall in Georgetown, South Carolina, just south of Myrtle Beach, about halfway between there and Charleston. And there were a few rank and file white workers there, and one guy is about 40-ish maybe, worked in the paper mill, who said that like he liked a lot of the Sanders's of the Sanders economic program, but he couldn't understand why the Democrats keep getting distracted into the moral issues. So I kind of prodded him a little bit to nail down what he was talking about, and gay marriage and abortion and stuff. So I tried the pluralism thing with him, right? That look, like you can work with people who believe in different stuff, right? Not much success. But then I said, well, but yeah, like I try to explain, how other people saw things, right? And then finally I said to him, look, I mean, which is more important to you, right? That no woman ever be able to have an abortion, or do you get guaranteed access to healthcare, or that no two same-sex people ever be permitted to marry, or that you can count on a pension and a dignified retirement. And no, I didn't win it over, right? I stopped him in his tracks for a second, but the fact that I, a stranger whom he didn't know from Dick's Hat Band, as my grandmother would say, could stop him in his tracks for a second, right? I mean, that suggests pretty strongly that somebody who has standing in his life and his environment could eventually move him, right? Enough that he would, that he would react to somebody in his cell group or local or whatever at advancing a reproductive rights resolution in the same way that I just kind of look down at the floor when they say the pledge before a union meeting, right? Because what we need to build is the kind of solidarities that ironically the right built right after Gold War, right? Where so that I remember in the Reagan years, like people would point this out, that that the Reagan coalition is fundamentally unstable because of the two big wings of it are incompatible. But they're incompatible unless you've done the work that makes clear to either side that the success of the other side is a precondition for their own success, right? And I remember, like, we had a guy from the Workers' Party in Brazil come and talk to us when we were getting the Labor Party off the ground, and somebody mentioned coalition, and that's the point he made. He said, no, you don't want a coalition, you want an alliance, right? But you want to have that sameness of purpose, right? And you don't do that, right, from mobilizing. Like, you don't get that from rah-rah. Like, the only way you get that is through working hard to build connections based on trust and mutual support among working people who are out there, like, in the society. And that just takes time. And
it takes time, and it takes a lot of work. It takes work that goes outside of simply posting something on Twitter or Facebook. And I think we've seen the lack of effectiveness that comes out of trying to mobilize people through social media. And I think people are becoming a little more savvy about that, which, I'm at least grateful for. Thank you so much for taking the time to reference. Yeah, this was such a great conversation. And I'm sorry, what was that?
Oh, and I just said thanks for having me.
Of course, it's our pleasure. And hopefully you'll come back again. I mean, there's still so much to, talk about, and, we only have so much time, but it's always a pleasure to hear from you. So take care, and hopefully we'll talk soon.
Yep. Thanks a lot.